Well, hello, Claire Obermarck here. I'm going to do some more stories about water today. I'm going to introduce today's story with a poem. It's called Herbal Essence. I'm thinking about my family at home, and so I want to do some kind of unknown little stories for these sessions and try and do something a little bit different. And I'm going to start it with a poem called Herbal Essence. And it's about a place called Malham Cove, and it has in it a beautiful waterfall with a pool, a natural pool called Janet's Foss. And there's the fairy who lives behind the waterfall in the cave there, and traditionally they used to dip the sheep in there. And you have to get through it through walking a couple of miles through the fields where there's goats and cows and sheep and the usual. And then the smell of the wild garlic and the bluebells just hits you as you round the curve into the woods. And you go past an old tree with lucky coins stuck on it, and then you get to Janet's Foss, and it's really beautiful. They say a cow can crush and kill a man, not on purpose. It would be manslaughter. No cow has ever been charged, I say, and by dusk we stake out Malham Cove. 3 fields in on the rough trodden path, the goats appear from nowhere. As fearful of the sheer bulk of a cow I am of their indifferent yellow stare. We are moving landscape to them, not to be eaten or trampled on, please. Albeit gruffly, they let us pass, holding us still. We trip-trap over the grate, into the bluebell garlic-soaked wood, pat the trunk decorated with lucky coins, go towards the foss they used to dip the sheep, holding them in the wet as goats looked on. And Malham Cove is famous for having the largest underground lake in Europe, so it's very famous for potholing and climbing and things like that. I'm going to take us to a different place now for a legend and folk tale about a water creature that's associated with marshlands and the fens and the cars. He's called the Tiddyman, and he was quite a trusted wetland spirit. He's about the size of a 3-year-old child with a long white beard and hair, and he wears a long grey cloak, and he looks like a wee grandad. And he lives down in the water holes, and he tends to come out at night. And you know when the Tiddyman's about because you hear the cry of the peewit, the bird, the peewit, that's his voice. And during the wet months, if the water rose too high and started endangering people's homes, they'd go out and they'd shout together, "Tiddyman, we out a name, the water's through." And they'd repeat this over and over again until they heard the call of the peewit. And then they'd go inside, and the next morning the water will have receded. Now this continued on, and life continued on until the authorities were talked into draining the wetlands by the Dutch. And when the Dutchmen arrived, promising wealth from draining the boggy lands, the locals and the farmers knew this was really no good, because the marshlands, the cars and the fens were good at soaking up storms, and the way that the land worked in and around the marshlands, they all kind of depended on each other. And they knew this. So they weren't too happy about it, but they weren't too surprised either when the Dutchmen went off onto the marshlands and just simply disappeared into the mist. The locals said it's the Tiddyman, and he's growing angrier, you know, because of what they're doing. So the authorities just sent more men from Holland, and gradually the changes they made the waters run from the marshes into the rivers. And by now the Tiddyman really lost his patience with both the authorities and the Dutchmen and the car folk. So the first thing he did was make the cattle ill, and then curdled the milk. And then children and babies became ill, and a fever spread, the crops perished. And at first the locals blamed witches and boggles. So there were many old herb wives and men who may have been gifted with prophecy are put to death at this time by this ignorant outlook by the townsfolk. But the pestilence continued. So finally the whole community gathered together And they needed to let the Tiddy man know that they did not agree with the marshlands being drained either. So could he please stop, taking it out on them? Each man, woman and child gathered at the dyke, and each had a bowl or a cup of water. And all together they poured it out, saying, "Tiddy man, we out a name, here's water for thee, techt haspel and done." And then the sounds of crying, wailing children was heard, as the spirits of the children who'd passed away through the fevers rose up out of the marshes and began asking the Tiddy man too to forgive their families. And then everything went quiet, and those spirits passed on to where they were needed to go, and all was quiet in the evening. And then the sound of the peewit was heard, calling out in the dark. The Tiddy man had heard them. And it wasn't long before the crops recovered, the fever stopped, and the people prospered again. However, they continued to take a bowl or cup of water out each month as a gift to the Tiddy man. And who knows what waterhole is living down today. That story comes from the marshlands in North Lincolnshire in England. The Fens marshlands in the south are pretty similar. And Lincolnshire has a long coastline on the east side heading out to the North Sea. So it's really surrounded by water. And the Tiddy man said to possibly be Shakespeare's inspiration for Caliban in The Tempest. But maybe the tale comes because there was a pestilence brought about through the draining of the fens by the Dutch in the 17th century. We don't always know how these tales come to be, but a good tale sticks if it's retold enough. If you'd like to retell that story, you can practice it by looking at a book, Dancing with Trees, by Alison Galbraith and Alette J. Willis, both fabulous traditional storytellers. And that's a collection of eco tales. And you'll find it in other places, but that's a lovely place to start if you want to practice. I've given you the bones of the story, so you can embroider that tale, and make it longer if you wish. Okay, that's it for today from Tales by the River. Bye bye.